Welcome to this session, and just so we can make sure you're in the right place, this session is AirBnBeware, short-term rentals, long-term Pwnage, and our speaker is Jeremy Galloway. The room is South Seas IJ, so if that doesn't make any sense to you, probably in the wrong place. A couple of quick notices just before we let Jeremy get on. First of all is to get you to stop by the business hall located in Bayside AB. The Black Hat Arsenal's on the Palm Foyer on level 3, and of course the Arsenal reception is at 5 o'clock this evening. And if you haven't picked up your merchandise today, it's your last chance to visit the Black Hat Swag and Bookstore. Quick reminder, if you've got your phone with you, which I suspect you have, can you put it on vibrate? It's a lot more fun that way and saves disturbing everybody else that's in the room. So without further ado, Jeremy.
Thanks. Thank you guys. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. So as he said, my name is Jeremy. Really excited to present AirBnBeware, short-term rentals, long-term Pwnage. So we've got a lot of content today. So we're going to jump in really fast, and we're just going to keep the fast pace up for the rest of the talk. So let's do it. So as I said, my name is Jeremy, and I love hacking and security with every part of my body. It's something I've been really passionate about since 2002. You know, I try to stay involved, whether it's security groups or conferences, or like, even if it's just submitting a simple bug report to an open source security project. I love all of you guys. I love this community of intelligent deviants. So let's jump in with the high level takeaways. So there's a few things I want to convince you guys of. The first thing is that Airbnb and these rental networks, at this point, they're too big to ignore anymore. Honestly, I probably could have given this talk in 2013 when Airbnb was up and coming, but at this point, it's reached absolute critical mass. The next thing is that connecting to these rental networks, it increases your risk quite a bit, quite more than you might think. The next thing is that home networking hardware, you know, that modem, that router sitting there, yeah, it's really worth targeting. This is a big one, man. Oh, this is a big one. This is something I think our industry and the media gets wrong a lot of times, so it's really important that we try to get it right today. The biggest threats you face aren't from some elite foreign government with 0 days. No, it's the simple, widespread threats that end up causing the most ownage. Lastly, when attackers don't have physical access to hardware and devices, risk is largely mitigated. So let me ask everyone here, have you ever gotten on a network and you log on and you start to get a funny feeling? Like kind of like a quiet, eerie feeling, like the hair raises on the back of your neck, sort of like this intangible sense that the network is hacked, or that you could hack the network, or that it could be hacked soon. See, we security peeps, we have this security sixth sense. We sort of know this stuff, but the average person just doesn't. They just don't think twice about it. So I was inspired for this talk. Earlier this year, I took a snowboarding trip to Colorado with a bunch of my friends. And admittedly, I snowboard like a Texan. So by the last day, like I was totally beat up. So I kind of wanted to like lift my spirits up. So I thought, oh, I know, I'll go back to the rental. I'll hack the network to mess with my friends' web browsing. Like that'll be hilarious. So in my head, I was like, okay, cool. Like it'll take a couple hours, some poking, some prodding. But then when I walked up to the router, I just saw it sitting there. I could pick it up. I could look at it. I could touch it. And within 5 minutes flat, I own the network. See, this talk is important, not just because hacking is fun and owning networks is like a hobby of mine. I'm giving the talk because my friends and I, we don't stay at hotels anymore. We pretty much only stay at Airbnbs. And you know, I have friends and family and people that I love stay at Airbnbs. And even if they don't rent, a lot of them are property managers, and I don't want them to get owned. I want them to sort of understand the risks and really what it takes to be safe. So really big disclaimer here, Airbnb is in the title of this talk. Nothing that I'm talking about is specific to Airbnb. All short-term rentals are affected. So I'm kind of curious, raise your hand if you've ever stayed at a rental or you have a rental property. If you've ever stayed in Airbnb. Okay, quite a number of people. So if you've ever stayed at one of these rentals, you know 99% of the time, it's totally cool. Like, it's no big deal. But sometimes, like, some strange things can happen. So I have a friend back in Austin, and she manages, like, 10 properties. And this suit and tie, like, normal business guy, like, super proper looking guy, came to stay for the weekend, stayed the whole time, left, no big deal. So her maid came through to clean the place up. And she gets to the bathroom and she calls my friend. She's like, "You have got to come see this." So my friend rushes over there, and sure enough, the bathtub was half full with human hair. So like the point is, like, your guests can really surprise you. You don't know what they're doing at that rental. So So I kind of want to shift gears a little bit. I want to shift to thinking about numbers and thinking about economics specifically. So Airbnb is it's a small part of this much larger economic movement. So the economists and the business crowd know all about the sharing economy. Do you? You should. I mean, in InfoSec, we like to, kind of stay isolated, keep our heads in the sand. But the sharing economy is a global change. It's influencing every industry, including security. So it's technically a misnomer to call it the sharing economy. It's more accurate to call it the access economy. But whatever you call it, the economic impact is real. And the gears that drive the sharing economy are efficiency and trust. Oh, I need this one thing. I don't want to buy 10 of them. Oh, I have that one thing. Here you go. You can kind of think of it as crowd-based capitalism. So you guys probably recognize a lot of these companies you know and love. Airbnb, Kickstarter, Uber, Instacart, they're all part of this bigger picture. We live in a world where the largest car rental company owns no cars and the largest property rental company owns no property. That's where we're at. So PricewaterhouseCoopers, they did a really major economic study on the sharing economy a few years ago. And even still today, this is still one of the most important reports on the topic. Now, take a close look at this. If you work in security and the cover image doesn't make you uncomfortable, you need to start looking for another job because this cover is as scary as it is accurate. Okay, so let's take a closer look at what's actually going on with Airbnb. So it's become abundantly clear that short-term rentals have become a really major part of the US tourism industry. One estimate puts the market size at 100 billion, that's billion with a B. And the number of people staying at these rentals has doubled in less than 4 years. So first time I was like going through researching Airbnb, I was like, wait, did that say 100 billion? I was like, there's no way. Let me zoom enhance on that. Did it really say 100 billion? I just had to check the numbers again. I'm like, there's no way. And the thing is a number like 100 billion, it's huge and it's abstract. So I kind of wanted some concrete comparisons to sort of understand. So I just whipped up a little graph. So on the far left-hand side in gray, you see the Las Vegas gaming market, clocked in about $6.3 billion market size last year. That's all of the casinos you see up and down this strip, every one of them. It's about $6.3 billion. Next to that in yellow, something we're all familiar with, cybersecurity, big money, right? Right. One over in purple at $85 billion is the global cocaine market. Over one more, that's the rental networks at $100 billion. And so I kind of wanted a comparison for something that was larger than 100 billion, and it wasn't really hard to find, the cloud market. So all things cloud. In 2015, it was about $110 billion market. So now when I think of rentals, I think they're somewhere in between the popularity of cloud and cocaine. So anytime you're a company of this size, you're going to get in the papers a lot. And when you're Airbnb, the titles, the paper headlines look something like this. They were valued at $30 billion. What? $30 billion? That's like an oil company or Apple. The thing is, it's actually not really surprising once you look at the numbers. Over 350x increase in less than 5 years. Now, if you're an investor, this slide should be making your pupils dilate and your mouth salivate. They have more guests than many small and medium-sized countries. There's targets, listings, targets, they're everywhere. They've had over 60 million guests stay with them, and they have presence in almost every single country. Now, in my head, I was like, oh man, more numbers, I need to make this more concrete. So in my head, I think of Starbucks as being ubiquitous, right? There's a Starbucks on every corner, and on some corners, there's 2 Starbucks. So when you go and actually look at the numbers, there's 23,000 Starbucks globally. New York City alone, just New York City, has 40,000 Airbnb rentals. Okay, if you add all of these up, 11,000 Walmarts, 30,000 Subways, McDonald's, hotels, every gas station in the world. If you add all of that up, it's still not even a drop in the bucket compared to the 2 million Airbnb rental networks. That's 2 million networks you could own. 2 million potentially vulnerable networks. And it's not a US thing. They're in Paris, Rome, Amsterdam, Rio. It's totally a global phenomenon. So just last year, you see headlines like this, $100 million round. They doubled their bookings again to 80 million. And then, we got another private round of $1.5 billion. So New York City alone in 2016, this year, they're projected to generate about $610 million of economic activity just within New York City. So it doesn't take a brilliant financial analyst to understand what's going on here. Wheezy can break it down. Airbnb is a money machine, a wildly popular money machine at that. But every headline isn't a good one. This particular study showed that 40% of people surveyed that stay at Airbnbs, they admitted to snooping. And when you survey millennials, the number jumps up to 56%. The thing is, it's not really all that surprising. I mean, I know when I stay somewhere, I open the doors and I check to see what's open and what's not. I mean, it's not that strange to be a little curious. And the same thing when you get on the network too. Now, some people are thinking I'm a business dude. I don't mess with Airbnb. That's just home users. Well, if you think they've been aggressive about going after the vacation rental market, you haven't seen anything yet. They are going straight for the heart of business travel. So show of hands, has anyone here stayed at an Airbnb or a rental through work, either expensed it to them or directly through work? Right? Show of hands? Okay, so a few people, but it's getting more and more popular. All the cool kids are already doing it, Google, Salesforce, Twilio, SoundCloud, but they're not doing it because it's cool. They're doing it because it actually makes a lot of business sense. It's really convenient. The rates are much cheaper. They actually even have specific web apps just made for business travel managers to make billing and all this stuff, all this tracking easier. They even go so far as to just give away free credits just to get the business crowd. So in short-term rentals are yeah, business. Okay, so I want to shift gears a little bit and start getting into the tech stuff. So in the last 6 months, show of hands, in the last 6 months, have you personally, not your significant other, not your network administrator, have you personally updated your router security? Hands. All right, so a fair amount of people, and this is a security crowd. I'm a security dude, and I don't even normally think about my router that much unless something comes up. So I kind of want to get interactive for a little bit. I can't be the only one having fun. So I have this really basic wireless router up here, something you'd find in a rental unit. If you're feeling brave, the SSID is shown up here. It's AirBnBeware. No password to get in. It's not connected to the internet. So what I want you guys to do is log into the router. And I want you to browse around with the attacker's mindset. What can you change? What buttons can you push? How can you influence the routing on this device? And if you connect, please don't be a weave. Please don't set an admin password. Don't DOS the network. Okay, if you don't trust me, or if you don't trust the wireless, or if you don't trust your neighbor, you can still totally follow along. Take your phone out, take your device out, and if you just Google D-Link emulator, the first hit it will give you a full interface that you can log into, click through, and see the entire router operating system. So I will not be offended. I actually want you guys to go through this while I'm giving the presentation. So I don't know if you guys remember earlier, I was talking about, you get a funny feeling on a network. So I have this mental scale of trust when I connect to a network for the first time. So to the far right side, it's like your home network. You're yeah, I'm totally safe on my home network. I know everything about this. I know all the devices. You feel good. Kind of in the middle is when I connect to a university network. They probably have a really robust network, but there's still thousands of students with malware doing who knows what. So I'm a lot more careful when I'm on a university network. The far left side is that random hotel kiosk. You type your password in that and you're gonna wanna change it immediately. And so for me, Airbnbs, I kind of put it at that 15-20%. I mean, it's not total chaos, but you should be aware. When it comes to security, you're usually kind of just crossing your fingers going I hope it's okay. So quick little look at a basic home network. Got clients, infrastructure, home network, like your home router, and the internet. So as an industry, we do a really good job of protecting the clients. You got AV and code signing and local security policies. And if you work at a bigger company or a modern tech company, you might even have an endpoint agent installed on your device. And on the server side, we do a really good job too. We spend a lot of times like making certificates and firewalls. And we've got all these bug bounty programs and input filtering. But on the home router side, we basically have two things. We have the password protected admin panel and the lack of physical access to the device. And that makes me really sad. That's the only thing protecting these networks. So when you connect to these rental networks, you're exposing yourself to more risk. But how much risk? Can it actually be quantified? So if you guys have ever taken a sexual health class or a sexual education class or a health class, you might have learned about something called sexual exposure. Now, what is it? It's basically an algorithm that helps quantify risk. So in this example, the numbers that I'm using are from national averages. So the first thing they ask you is, how many partners have you had? Put in 7. Approximately, how many partners have they each had? 4. So even if you're only directly have contact with 7 people, you're actually indirectly exposed to over 9,000 people. That's right, over 9,000 people. And so the way that they actually calculate that, like, how do you go from 7 to 9,000? The way it's calculated is using something called a finite geometric series. Now, if you ask me about finite geometric series during the Q&A, I will throw my laptop at you like a Pokemon. So really, I mean, the whole analogy is like, even if you've only stayed at 3 or 4 Airbnbs, you might actually be exposed to all kinds of people that have been on the network before you. I want you guys to think twice before having a one network stand. I mean, it's a silly phrase. It's a silly phrase, but it's a serious warning. And I think the analogy, the comparison of trading convenience for risk actually makes a lot of sense. Oh, I know I should be using better security, but it's just this one network. It's fine. I don't know, is it? I mean, that's why we land here on the scale of trust. I mean, do you feel safe? You shouldn't feel safe. So I hope a lot of people in the audience recognize this GIF. This was one of my favorite hacks of 2012. The image, of course, is of the Internet Census 2012, where an anonymous researcher, he popped like 400,000 boxes and scanned the internet. So inside his report, he had this to say: the vast majority of all unprotected devices are consumer routers and set-top boxes. So now this particular attack, and some of the other attacks that I'm about to talk about, they're done remotely. But I want you guys to keep your focus on the what, not the how. So the what of the network layer. So back in 2007, this one was really funny. This was totally nostalgic for me. So in 2007, you visit this adult website and they're like, oh, you need to install a codec. I'm like, did we travel back to the 90s? It asks you to install this backdoor DMG. And essentially, the only thing that it did was add a malicious DNS server to the operating system. But don't worry, Macs don't get viruses, so probably okay. Fast forward a little bit in the future, Op Ghost Click, run by the FBI. So the thing is, I'm about as anti-authoritarian as they come. I give the spooks a lot of flack. But this was a major coordinated takedown that actually resulted in many arrests. There was a cybercrime ring that was using DNS changing malware to perpetrate click fraud. So what they did was users would browse the web and they'd replace ads. And they made over $14 million before it got shut down. So fast forward a little bit more, 2013, Polish Shirt published information about another DNS changing malware. This time it targeted Polish banking users. Now I have to say, this was a really creative attack. So what happened was these banking customers were sent a phishing email. And whenever you click the link for the phishing email, it actually launched a cross-site request forgery attack against your local router. So the user clicks the link, and then the request forgery tries admin, admin password, admin blank, and it keeps doing this until it got into the router. And once it would go into the router, it would add a malicious DNS server. Then the users go to visit this Polish banking website, and they got man in the middle. They got redirected to a phishing page, and their accounts were harvested. So in 2014, we had a little bit of stir in the industry when the moon was discovered. It only owned 1,000 routers, But because it was self-replicating, it got a lot of attention and it got a lot of people talking, including Dan Geer. And Dan Geer had this to say: the router situation is as touchy as a gasoline spill in an enclosed shopping mall. And when Dan talks, I listen. You should listen too. He's one of the smartest and the most articulate guys in our industry. And to me, the router situation is best exemplified by a raging dumpster fire. That's where we're at. That's where we're at with security. So even sooner, I was doing research for this, and this happened just a few months ago. So there's an attack targeting South Koreans, and the attack actually affected over 100,000 people. And it was a Trojan, but what it did was it installed a malicious proxy file on the user's browser. So it was attacking that network proxy layer. And you fast forward all the way up to today. Yesterday, you had crippling HTTPS with unholy pack. Today, actually right now, there's a bad WPAD talk going on. And later this week, toxic proxies at DEF CON. All of these are sort of focusing on that proxy network layer. And obviously, I could not be standing here. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. 2 years ago, Dr. Paul Vixie and a couple guys from CERT did a talk on abuse of customer premise equipment. So very CERT type jargon. It's really just another way of saying all of your local network gear at home. And with regards to threats, they had this to say: the home router is a network proxy for most things on your home network. So you own that, and even well-defended devices on the home network, they're at risk. And the thing is, I love CERT. I love the advice that they give, and this was a great talk, but it doesn't even begin to cover the threats of letting other people touch your hardware, of using other random networks. So at this point, you might be wondering, okay, Airbnb is popular. I get that there's some risk, but really, what's the difference between Starbucks Wi-Fi and an Airbnb? Is there really any difference? There is a difference. It's hardware. The thing is, physical access changes everything. If you let an attacker have physical access, that's it. It's game over. So you guys know all about APTs, right? So I have a new APT called the average paperclip threat, and you don't need to be a MacGyver to use this. If you can walk up to a router and you can undo a paperclip, you can be an APT. This is the only thing it takes to wipe out an entire layer of security. So that admin protected password panel, yeah, there's not really much protection there. And honestly, you don't even need to reset the router most of the time. If you can walk up to that router, if you can pick it up, if you can put it to your face, if you can look at it, you have the default credentials right there. It just doesn't get easier than that. So when an attacker can touch your hardware, you don't just have bad network security, you have no network security. So all the attacks we've talked about before, none of this requires O-Day or crazy exploit code. Things like changing DNS servers, using WPAD to push proxies. These are old techniques. And I know in our industry, we're all about cutting edge, cloud 3.0, containerized, front end, big data. But I'm here to tell you guys, network hacking isn't dead yet. It's not. Just last year, the EFF sponsored So Hopelessly Broken, which is a router hacking contest, and they published dozens of vulnerabilities for home routers. You have specific hacking resources just for routers, sites like RouterPwn. You can find default passwords, security bypasses. You got the big players in the game, Metasploit. They've had backdoors for Netgear, Belkin, Linksys router. They've had these for years. They even have specific content and pre-built tools focused on embedded router hacking. It's just too easy. And what I like to say is, if a bored teenager can hack your network, you're in trouble. So here's a few bored teenagers you guys might recognize. This is Jeremy Hammond at DEF CON. In 1999, you had Comrade, who rocked NASA really hard when he was 15 years old. He was indicted shortly after that, and he killed himself. Jake, this 14-year-old kid, hacked Xbox Live and hacked Call of Duty 2. So would you feel secure with them on your network? So let's talk about attacks. I want to shift to attacks. So go ahead and log back into the router. If you guys want to follow along, looking at the router interfaces, go ahead and poke through that. So some people are asking oh, come on, man, is it really that bad? Is it really that bad? Well, when your network is owned, the impacts are things like exposure of sensitive information, modification of trusted data, and injection of data. So yeah, it is that bad. It doesn't really get much worse than that. So one of the easiest attacks that you can perpetrate on a router, easiest thing is just enabling remote administration. That way you can log back in a week from now, a month from now, 6 months from now, long after you've stayed at the Airbnb. And the funny thing is, like, even though the software for these routers are terrible, they actually have some features. So in this particular router, you can create an inbound filter so that only you can remotely manage the device. So if you scan it from the internet or scan it from the outside, you won't see anything. One of the scariest types of attacks, I think, is just the passive adversary that just sits, waits, and listens. They add them. You can do things like add yourself as a syslog server. Just keep tabs on what's going on in the network. You can even use Dyne DNS to remotely manage the network. You know, it's probably the router modem has using DHCP, so the IP address is going to change. You can use this so that you always have tabs on it. One of the simplest attacks ever can be done in just a couple clicks. All you do is back up the router setting, download a GUI Windows program called Router Pass View from Nearsoft. Next, 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 load up the backup file, and it spits out plain text credentials. Dead simple tool. Anyone can use this tool. It's so easy. This thing can reveal things like PPTP passwords, L2TP passwords, ISP credentials, more stuff. I mean, if you want to be a troll on a network, if you control the router, you can do things like block access to specific websites. One of my favorite things to do when I hack my friends' networks is just turn on parental controls. They hate that. You can do troll things like reduce the speed of the network, change it from full duplex to half duplex. You want to get a little more malicious, you can start doing things like adding hosts to the DMZ. So if you add a host to the DMZ, basically what it does, it removes that network firewall. So the client is just sitting there naked on the internet. And when they're sitting on the DMZ, a lot of attacks that only work over a LAN or that only work over full man in the middle, they'll actually work over the full internet. You can do really innocuous things like reducing the security by enabling security features. Like you turn on WPS, and that's a hard setting to detect that someone changes that. Average person is going to be, it's really hard for them to notice things like that. You can even do things like add yourself as an NTP server to control network time. Now, admittedly, I only know of one attack that's based off of NTP. That was the iOS auto bricking update issue we saw earlier this year. But the point is that you can deeply influence various aspects of the network if you can control these routers, if you want to. Of course, you can't talk about router hacking without someone mentioning firmware modification. Realistically, this is a pretty fairly advanced attack. It would take a lot of time. More importantly, it takes a lot of motivation. But the thing is, it is plausible. And it would be extremely, extremely difficult to detect. Along the same lines would be remote administration through something called TR-069. So TR-069 is what ISPs use to push out firmware updates and send updates to routers. So if you guys remember ROM Pager or the misfortune cookie vulnerability last year, that was based on TR-069. So again, it's more advanced, but it's totally plausible. Being that these are routers, it should be no surprise that they let you change and manipulate the routes. Hey, add yourself as a network gateway and you can start your man-in-the-middle attack that easy. You can make static routes, you can make yourself the network gateway. If there's any CCNA holders in here, you'll appreciate this. This router, you can actually program it with RIP. You can actually configure this thing with RIP. The attacker's just sitting back, just waiting. They can manipulate their traffic, or they can just watch you. So a lot of the attacks we talked about earlier focused on DNS. So it's definitely a prime target. So show of hands, does anyone know why an attacker might want to change one DNS server but not both? You can just shout it out if you know. Exactly. You don't want to overload yourself. When they load up, Netflix or some not safe for work site, you don't want all of the traffic flooding your DNS server so much that's going to knock it over. You want to make sure things still look legit. So when an attacker gets control of DNS, it looks something like this. Yeah, it's basically just like that. And the reason is because once you get that DNS foothold in the network, you're opened up to a lot more attacks. You can do things like SSL downgrading, things like phishing, farming, capturing hashes. You can do things like send malicious updates to your computers. And even some of those WPAD attacks that we talked about earlier, you can do some of those. So specifically with WPAD, if you can answer a WPAD DNS query, that network is in trouble. That network is like Shane McMahon getting stunned, and your network is left dead, flat on its back. That's what happens if an attacker controlled WPAD on your internet. So for the attacker, the hardest thing is picking which attack they want to use. I mean, there's no 0-day. There's almost no exploit code at all. If you use Metasploit's Autopwn, there's exploit code in there. But there's pre-built tools. You don't really need a lot of infrastructure. These attacks can be totally automated. They can be passive. They can be really difficult to detect because there's so little forensic recording done on a router. You can wipe the logs, no problem. So I'm going to give you a quick little demo. So for this demonstration, me as the attacker, all I've done is log into the router and add myself or add my DNS server. So let's see what it looks like from the client side. So with videos, there are no demo gods, so this should work. So, all right, oh, cool, yeah, just got to my Airbnb. Oh, man, it's time to get on the internet. Oh, let's see, it's time to Netflix and chill. Yeah, okay, let's see. Netflix, what the hell? Secure Wi-Fi? No, hold on, let's try Hulu and chill. Okay, Hulu and chill. Oh, man, what is this thing? It wants me to authenticate, blah, 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 secure Wi-Fi, secure router, enter username and password. Okay, sure. Username, Jay Galloway, password, this password is super secure. Boom. Okay, cool, let's see if we can browse the internet now. Let's try good old Google, see if that'll get us there. Type it in. Okay, cool, we're on the internet. Back to Netflix and chill. So at this point, the user has completely forgotten about the captive portal. And on the attacker side, we've got a few things going on. So you see a lot of these domains and things scrolling by. All of these are web requests coming from people on the network. Hey, I'm trying to reach this resource. And we're saying, no, go to my captive portal, go to my captive portal. We're sitting there waiting, and boom, we just got their credentials. So these are the NTLM hashes. You can take this, we can copy these and crack these later. So up here you see some things like we have anything that ends in .com, come to me. Anything that matches my wildcard, send to me. And once they send the NTLM hashes, send them back to the regular internet. And at that point, the attacker's got you. They've got you. The thing is, Pokemon can make anything funny, but if those were creds to your corporate network, you wouldn't be laughing. So these attacks, I don't want you to focus on that particular attack. That was really just an example of a whole range of attacks that you can perform. So you can be really subtle, like the actors for Operation Ghost Click, just doing subtle things like replacing ads. Or you can be more direct. You can force users to your page. You can customize the attack based on their traffic. You can be just an annoying troll, or you can actually perpetrate some devastating attacks. Some of the attacker types you might want to consider or think about is Bobby Tables, you know, that bored teenager. Mom and dad are off cross-country skiing for a few hours, and he's just bored at home and wants to play on the network. You have trolls, and you have full-blown black hats out there, unsurprisingly. And honestly, admittedly, I don't think there's going to be any kind of like multi-million-dollar crime ring from Airbnbs, but I wouldn't worry about that. But what I would worry about is the opportunistic criminal, right? The guy that's not trying to rob the bank, the guy that's trying to walk up and just check, see if you left your car door unlocked. That's the threat that we're talking about here. So with these attacks, you can't target an individual person with these, but you can do some semi-targeted attacks like targeting conferences and trade shows. I know for a fact, I can guarantee many people at Black Hat and at DEF CON are staying at Airbnbs right now. You can do things like target specific locations, like think about like super hipster developer neighborhoods in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, and think about the people that stay there. Even in DC, you can target high-end rentals for high-end targets. Even things like military bases. There's a military graduation, thousands of people come in to see it, the hotels get booked up, and a lot of people end up staying at Airbnbs. Now, a military professional would not send their secret credentials over an Airbnb network, right? Right? It just makes me really sad that that's how bad it is. So Dan Kaminsky spoke yesterday. He's one of the key holders to DNS, one of the key holders to the internet. So thank you, Dan. So ICANN goes through crazy measures to make sure your DNS is secure. They have these keys, locked cages, they have like iris scanning and smart cards and weight detection and all this stuff. This is how ICANN secures your DNS. This is how you secure your DNS. Do you have security? Compute says no. So let's shift gears a little bit. We talked about all the ways you can get owned, get yourself owned. So I kind of want to spend some time talking about how you can keep yourself safe on these nasty networks. So the first thing, it's simple. Hard code DNS in your devices. Whether it's Google DNS or OpenDNS, hard code it into your phone. Hard code it into your laptop, whatever device you're using. It's really easy. The next thing is you definitely want to make sure that automatic proxy discovery is turned off. That's what WPAD attacks. So admittedly, the WPAD issue, it does affect Windows computers more. They're a lot noisier. But even if you run a Mac, it's a good idea. Just check and make sure that the automatic proxy setting is turned off. So of course, you can't talk about using insecure networks without talking about VPNs. So I have no official relationship with TunnelBear. Don't use their paid product or anything like that. But I really like their software because it's so simple. And the thing is, most VPN software is just needlessly complex. This software, one click to install a browser extension, one click to turn the VPN on. And admittedly, any free service, especially services like this, there's definite limitations. In this case, they limit your traffic to 500 megabytes a month, which is pretty small. But the thing is, you don't need to be VPNing your Xbox Live. You don't need to VPN, your video streaming all the time. What you should do is just turn it on when you need to make a secure transaction, when you need to buy that plane ticket, whenever you need to log in and check that email. So I know a lot of you thinking, I'm good. I've got a corporate VPN. I've got that Cisco VPN set up. I'm good. I'm safe. Well, I hope you guys have time to check out some of those other talks because you might be not as secure as you think. So many of these corporate VPNs are actually still vulnerable to some of those proxy attacks. And a lot of corporate proxies, most of the ones that I've used, they implement something called split tunneling. What split tunnel routing is, it means, hey, if you try to access internal.myoffice.com, it's going to go out the VPN. If you try to access Facebook, Gmail, it goes out the other connection. And it ends up leaving you really exposed. So even if you use a corporate VPN, make sure that you're not leaking anything. This one's a little less obvious for people, I think. If you just straight up just don't trust the network, you should use a mobile app off of Wi-Fi. So this way, the client can verify the server, and the server can verify the client, all without touching the rental network at all. Another really simple option, turn your phone into a hotspot, bypass the network entirely. Again, you're using your mobile data, so you probably don't want to go pirating like 10 Blu-rays. But if the network isn't trusted, it's a really easy option to have a side channel. Of course, I probably don't need to tell you guys this, never use plain text auth. Even if you're using a VPN, never use plain text auth. Think of Lana from Archer. Nope. And of course, use two-factor for every account that you care about. So these are some of the technical mitigations, but there's actually something way more important than that stuff. I want you guys to focus on behavioral mitigations, things that actually change the way you think about security, things that change the way you interact with your devices. If I could give one piece of advice, one piece of security advice to the average user, I would tell them to watch Mr. Robot. If you watch that show, you're exposing yourself to more security than 99% of the population. There's people in our community, C Junkie helps edit the show and make sure that the hacks are actually accurate. And if you watch that, you'll be at the top 1%. This is something I can't reiterate enough. Just be skeptical. When you're off of your trusted network, be skeptical. Be aware. Think about the first time you travel out of the country or the first time you traveled somewhere new. You don't want to be paranoid, but you want to be cautious. You want to beware. So even if you're just traveling at an Airbnb in the United States, you should still be really cautious. Be aware, be skeptical. So it's really important we do everything we can to protect ourselves, but it's really, really important that we hold website owners accountable for delivering the best security possible. That means things like asking that they support standards like HTTP strict transport security and things like HTTP public key pinning. Security standards like this, public key pinning can stop a man-in-the-middle attack dead in its tracks. Unfortunately, it's not that widespread. Netcraft did a survey of the entire internet. They scanned the entire internet for public key pinning, and they found that less than 3,000 sites were doing it correctly. So the thing is, these things don't change unless you demand them. So if you want better network security, you need to demand it. So I had a lot of interest from property owners. When I started talking about this, they were really interested, and they really care about keeping their guests safe. Single best piece of advice: remove physical access. Take that router, lock it in a closet, lock it in a secured room. If you stay in an Airbnb, you know it's normal for there to be a locked closet or a locked room. It's not that crazy. Think of R. Kelly. Keep your hardware trapped in the closet. Okay, real life, you can't always just like move your hardware around. In real life, a lot of times your gear is it is where it is. And I really like these pieces of atypical hardware. It's like these electronics enclosures. They make them specifically for Wi-Fi access points, so it's not gonna do anything like diminish the signal. It's not gonna degrade the wireless. But you lock this thing up and it keeps it away from the people that are curious. They have indoor-outdoor models for these things. There's plenty of sizes and shapes to accommodate your hardware. Now, the thing is, I tell this to a hacker, the first thing they're gonna say is, man, I could pick past that lock in 5 minutes. And if Jay Gore were here, I bet he could pick it in 30 seconds. But the point isn't to create perfect security. The point is to raise the bar, keep honest people honest. Right now, the only thing an attacker needs to do to own a network is want to. Okay, we just need to make it a little bit harder than that. I know this sounds crazy. You could just not offer Wi-Fi. Gasp! I know, it sounds crazy. But I've actually stayed at multiple Airbnbs for a night and just used my mobile network. It was honestly not a problem. This is something you guys probably know. Never, ever share your personal Wi-Fi connection. So even if the attacker doesn't have access to it, the router's in your front house and they're staying in the back house, you should still never share your wireless connection. You're just exposing yourself far too much. Instead, just get a separate low bandwidth line. It's inexpensive. If you're using Airbnb as a business, it makes business sense to do that. Some other options, you can just back up and restore your router settings every once in a while. I'm not saying do it after every guest, but just make it part of your Airbnb routine. Maybe do it every few months. This is a really big one. Some of the nicer Airbnbs I've stayed at, they have these guest guides, and they say things in there. It's like nearby entertainment and nearby restaurants, and it's really easy just to add a couple lines about online safety and security. I mean, you don't need to write a whole diatribe, just a couple lines that reminds people to be safe online and be skeptical and be aware. So unfortunately, I can't leave you guys with good news. The thing is, this problem is not going away. It's not going away anytime soon. So Rainforest Puppy disclosed SQL injection in Frac back in 1998. So tell me, why is it that we've been saying 2011, year of the breach, 2012, year of the breach, 2016, year of the breach? SQL injection has been the root cause for many, many, many of these breaches, even though it's almost 2 decades old. Why? Why? Because it's simple, it's widespread, and there's no easy fix. There's no update you install to fix SQL injection. And the Airbnb network situation is the same thing. There's no one button push. There's no CVE to resolve. There's no update. There's no one button fix. So start wrapping this up, guys. Some of the takeaways. In conclusion, whether you're staying at a rental or not, just you be skeptical and be aware when you're traveling. And if you don't trust the network, if you don't trust the network at all, just don't use it. Use a VPN, use your mobile data. Be cautious of that risk-convenience trade-off when you have a one network stand. Use network protection. APTs, average paperclip threats, they're simple but potentially devastating. And finally, if you love security, never let an attacker have physical access. So I'm gonna give you guys a little bit of homework. I want you guys to ask security professionals and hackers here at Black Hat and at DEF CON, ask them if they would use an Airbnb network without a VPN. And then ask them what they do to protect themselves and their devices when they're on a random network. Thank you guys for your time. Thank you for sharing your Black Hat with me. If If you want to get in touch, or if you want to send me your best phishing email, you can reach me here. If you guys want to bounce, you can. If you want to stick around, I think we have just a couple minutes for Q&A if you'd like. If there are any questions. All right, thank you guys.